Hello, I'm Walter Tupas. Welcome to Rappler Talk. We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the ASEAN. One of the reasons why we're celebrating is because joining us is one of the ASEAN biodiversity heroes, Alex Y. Simon from Indonesia and other heroes, and also the executive director of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. We are called a hotspot, a biodiversity hotspot in the region. But first, let's talk about the definition of biodiversity. What does it mean exactly? If you talk to your community members, you are an indigenous person and you talk to young people, how do you explain to them what biodiversity is?
So biodiversity, my junior indigenous people not much understand, but more I tell them this is a forest, our life, but keep for our future, for our young generation. This is correct. We create the mind to my people understand to keep the forest for the biodiversity. That's the meaning.
Roberto, ASEAN-wide, if we look at the bigger picture, why is the biodiversity in the ASEAN region important?
Voltaire, biodiversity is very important to ASEAN first. From biodiversity, we derive our food, clothing, shelter, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, air, water, even our spiritual nourishment comes from biodiversity. Therefore, the 630 million people of ASEAN is dependent on biodiversity. And ASEAN is very rich in biodiversity. We only occupy 3% of the world's Earth surface, but we are home to 18% of all known flora and fauna in the world, 30% of coral reefs, and 35% of mangrove forests. Three countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, are mega diverse. And therefore, it is very important that we preserve our biodiversity. Equally important is its role in the world because, as you know, everything is interconnected. Now, we look at ASEAN. ASEAN is progressive, is moving forward. It's now the seventh largest trading bloc in the world. By 2030, it hopes to be the number 3. But at the cornerstone of ASEAN's prosperity is its biodiversity. Take away biodiversity, don't protect or conserve biodiversity, and ASEAN will lose its bearing. So it's very important that we protect our biodiversity.
The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity honored at least 10 heroes from across the region. One of them is Alex. Who embodies the hero, the ASEAN biodiversity hero? Why are you recognizing them?
We are recognizing Alex and 9 others from ASEAN countries because they will serve as inspiration for other people in ASEAN to follow what they're doing exactly, to love biodiversity, to value biodiversity, to protect biodiversity, and their stories will reverberate and will really show that there is a need to protect our biodiversity. They have spent almost all their lives in protecting, conserving biodiversity. We must honor and likewise follow their footsteps.
Okay, Alex, can you tell us your story? What exactly did you do in Indonesia that inspired your community and which has been recognized by the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity?
My inspiring so when I younger, so I know biodiversity keep the life for my indigenous people. That's why I outside from Papua. When I grow younger, I understand because the forest is important for our generation, our future. That's why now I go back home. So people say, many friends tell me, Alex, why you go home? Because go raining, even I stay outside or to Bali. Even I go home, the raining is still raining. What can I do? Because no salary. But I know I'm concerned. because when I keep a biodiversity for my indigenous people, they keep it alive. Not only for me, for the world, for the climate change, but it is alive. Even gone biodiversity, no life on the world. Also, ASEAN more important. Many things we grow together because ASEAN is a very rich country.
What made you change your mind? Because you were a chef, I understand, from Germany, and then you were a tourist guide in Bali. What was it that made you go back to your home, to your community?
I go back when I grow young. My dad tell me, you go, I 7 years old. I don't understand when someday daddy tell me, you go and one day you come back. This is his story, I don't understand. But I'm in Seoul when I go back 2010. And then this is, I think that come back my instinct to understand, oh, that's the way. I must to leave everything. Family is say, Dad, why? Why we go back home? Why you go back? Because I live in my family in Bali, and I go back. I don't bring anything. But my identity, my dedicate, only one, help them. That's it.
And how exactly did you help them? What did you change in your community? What did you see in your community when you returned?
I returned, now they already changed, now put the rubbish on the street, now cutting the tree, and then the economy, they grow. I tell them for the guiding for the young or for the youth, and after I open the school, they can understand. Because biodiversity is more important for the him life. That's why. So my life, my thing, and many news tell me until when? Until my life. I can protect, I help them to grow.
What has been the outcome since you introduced such intervention, biodiversity conservation in your community? What has changed? What can you be proud of? What can you tell the ASEAN region that, hey, you can actually do this in your community, what I did in mine?
That is not easy, no easy way. But I hope someday they can change because it's blind. Who meet the blind people to stand up? You and us. And Asia must to tell them we are help them to stand up and sitting together in the Asia. That's my commitment.
Great. At the ASEAN level, Roberto, what would be the role of the heroes? You have 10 heroes. What would be the role beyond their countries?
I've said we want ASEAN to know their stories. We want ASEAN to know that there are people like Alex and the others who are doing a lot for biodiversity conservation and management. We want the destruction of the forest and the environment to be reduced or be stopped altogether. They are our heroes, and our dream is for ASEAN to continue enjoying the blessings of our rich natural resources.
That's good to hear. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity recently released the second edition of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook, highlighting conservation challenges. What are these challenges?
You know, Voltaire, in 2010 to 2020 is called the UN Biodiversity Decade. And in 2010, there is this so-called HE targets for all of the countries of the world to follow. 20 targets. And among them, for example, people must understand the value of biodiversity and that they're taking steps to protect and conserve biodiversity. Second, governments must include in their agenda efforts towards biodiversity conservation. Protected areas must be declared certain percentages in terms of terrestrial at least 17%, in terms of marine 11%, and businesses should come in towards biodiversity conservation. Indigenous peoples should also be involved. Now, the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 2 is a midterm assessment of how far ASEAN is moving forward. We want to know how ASEAN is doing, and we would like to let the countries know that this is your status of the moment and that you should do more efforts so that by 2020 we'll be able to meet these HE targets.
The destruction of biodiversity of the environment, the depletion of the resources, the extinction of species, those were the findings also, not only by the second edition but also by the first edition of the report. Which countries have been compliant and which have made bold steps in order to combat the destruction of the environment and biodiversity?
I think we are more upbeat now because ASEAN is moving together. With the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, all of these 10 countries are meeting on a regular basis, almost every month, and we have our strategic action plans to comply with these HE targets. And that is why this 2015, we prepared this draft and now of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 2, and we're now publishing this, and we'll be going to the different countries to tell them what efforts should they exert so that we can meet the HE targets.
Alex, forests in Indonesia are crucial in mitigating climate change because it's huge. Do you feel your country is trying to do its best to protect the environment so that it will continue to help the world offset carbon footprint and the emission of carbon?
I think yes, because world need us to keep, so that because no forest, the climate change is a problem. That's why my things, and I off because Indonesia they must to keep the forest for the climate change. That's why next step more better than now. This is when I think by myself, that is my way, but I don't know the government thing. But I want government help for biodiversity and more understand the people, more in the indigenous people must to understand, because biodiversity is more important for the human life.
Yeah. We're also celebrating the Indigenous Peoples Day on August 9. It's your day and it's timely. Your award is in fact timely. But what exactly does the award mean to your community, to the indigenous peoples of Indonesia? When you go home, what will you tell them?
So after in Philippines, I go home. I order commitment. I can a little celebrate for them to understand, solve the future, and then change the future for now after 2020, because in Indonesia more Olympic, there's more step them, and for now I go home. I tell her, because we can big celebrate. ASEAN give me something for us. This when I think, and then so today I sitting. There's many things coming from my mind. I learned by the ASEAN Biodiversity Hero. Then I think it's a good way for me to I change them. And I throw the big things that mine must to keep out. But it's not easy. But someday we can do.
What is your message to other indigenous peoples whose land, life, resources, environment, and biodiversity are being undermined by various factors and forces?
My message from Indonesian people, only one: keep your land, because that's your life. If you lose, you can find anything, because from the land you get everything free, no pay, no cost. That's my news.
On that note, thank you for joining us, Alex, and for sharing your story. Congratulations. Joining us also is Zachary Abdul Hamid. He's a scientist and diplomat, and he's one of the ASEAN Biodiversity Heroes. Welcome to Rappler Talk. Your work, your policy work in Malaysia has made an impact in the ASEAN region, particularly your analysis and assessment of the global biodiversity and ecosystem services. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, in fact, the point of takeoff is to look at the role of science, technology, or innovation in assisting policymakers or the politicians in developing a good program in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. So the key is the use of scientific knowledge to influence policy. But the way you do it with the political masters or the senior policymakers is not to be prescriptive. You cannot tell them you must do this, you must do that. You must be policy relevant, whereby the academic or scientists like me would provide options for the policymakers or the politicians to decide on their own, you know. So you must have that.
What particular challenge can you cite wherein the policymakers adopted your policy proposal where he felt that it's relevant to his policy agenda?
It must be relevant to everyday life. It must be to the point focus. For instance, to the politician, you know, like conservation of biodiversity, what's in it for them? What's in it for the people, you know? Conservation of biodiversity is good for a country. Sustainable use is also good, but it must also be predicated to providing the politician the ability of a particular policy to generate jobs for the people, you know. Job is very important. Secondly, can conservation and sustainable use increase the prosperity of the country? For instance, alleviating poverty. Those are the kinds of things that the politician would sit back and like to hear more from you. But if you treat something academically, I used to be a professor in the university for many years. Sometimes it doesn't register the interest. So just to sum up, I think the recommendation that you provide must be relevant and must be of use to the politician.
Which is usually contentious, especially at the international level and down the line. At the international level, the Convention on Biological Diversity has been discussed, has been approved, but on the ground, the implementation is different. In Malaysia, how did you balance the contentious issues between, one, economic benefits, and two, the utilization of the resources, the sustainable use of resources?
In Malaysia, or also in countries, or developing countries like the Philippines or some of our neighbors, the main concern of the political masters is the right to development. Because the right to development ensures poverty alleviation, ensures improvement of the citizens' life. That is sacrosanct. But at the same time, you must convince them to ensure the sustainability of those natural resources. You must conserve it. So there should be a balance between development and conservation. In the case of Malaysia, the other element is political will. The political leaders must have the political will to make the right policies. In our case, for biodiversity, we have what is called the National Policy on Biological Diversity, where we impress upon the need for conservation, but we also allow for development, responsible and sustainable development. It's not going to be easy, because we'll have pressure, in particular from the private sector who want to utilize open up land, But this is where a good set of recommendation from the advisors to the political masters can make a difference. In the case of Malaysia, so far we have been doing quite well.
Roberto, as far as the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is concerned, do you see other countries embracing this approach? How is this across the board? Is this being adopted?
Yeah, Professor Sakri is correct in a sense. The need to conserve biodiversity must be balanced with development. And so policymakers must understand that the use of biodiversity must not only be for today, but for the future. And we are very lucky because we have best practices already in Southeast Asia. For example, when you talk about protected areas, we now have ecotourism, we now have management planning, we now have stakeholders participation, because we should look at forests, not only for the trees, but for the other environmental services like water, clean air, and everything that it offers. So it's a total development in a way for these resources that will benefit the people and the country in the long run.
What are the gaps? We have rich experiences in terms of negotiating for the CBD, the Convention for Biological Diversity, and other policies.
I think it's been articulated by the director in his opening remark this morning. The big gap between the understanding of the conservation community and the public. And you showed some example in that very nice book that was produced by the ACB about the policeman in Indonesia shooting an orangutan to eat, about the Filipino farmer shooting the Philippine eagle, and that experience in China. So the gap is understanding, and this is one reason why the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is key to reduce that gap and promote the understanding on the regional level. And I think since its establishment, they've been doing that very well.
Speaking of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, you recently inaugurated your new building in UP Los Baños, and in your speech you said it's your gift to the world. It's ASEAN's gift to the world. What exactly are you giving to the public?
ACB was established in 2005 under the funding of EU. Entire funding coming from EU. Salaries, operational funds coming from EU. In 2010, EU changed course, and therefore ACB did not have any funding. But the ASEAN member countries decided that we can also do it on our own. And for that matter, the Philippines started the bridge financing, and the other ASEAN member countries said, we will contribute in kind. 12 years after, the operational funds of ACB has more than doubled thanks to the Philippine government, and the ASEAN members have likewise stepped up their in-kind contribution, and meaning to say that all of the countries of ASEAN are determined to protect and conserve biodiversity. As a testament, this is the new building saying that we will together protect and conserve our biodiversity. it is a gift of the Philippines. It's not only a gift of the Philippines, it's the gift of all the countries, because the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is owned by the 10 member countries, and hopefully that building will showcase that we are committed in preserving our biodiversity and be a model not only for the region and for the world.
If you're talking to an ordinary citizen who would like to participate in conservation efforts, what would you tell him or her? What are your tips?
Well, we have many programs. For example, for the youth, we have educational programs. For the government, we advocate for them to pass the necessary laws, for them to put in the necessary resources. But for sustainability, we also have these trust funds, where if you don't have the time, for example, to protect biodiversity, then let the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity do it for you, but please put your share. 1 ringgit or 1 peso will be enough. I think it is important not only to win the minds, but to win the hearts. Because really, what Prof. Sakri is saying is that we must let people understand that biodiversity is not about the trees and the birds and the flowers. It is about us. You know, the wisdom that Prof. Sakri stated, I still very clear to my mind. If people will die, the trees and the forest will still be there. But if the forest and the trees will fade out, there will be no chance for the people to live.
In Malaysia, you're called a giant among men.
Oh, they were joking.
But as we speak, having heard the speeches of other heroes, ASEAN biodiversity heroes, what humbled you? What inspired you? We've already talked to Alex, but among other heroes, which story inspired you and why?
I think the reason because I was born and raised in a rural setting. When I was born, I didn't even go to a hospital. I was delivered by the local midwife. Secondly, you're surrounded by nature, and to me, biodiversity is nothing but a way of life for many people in Southeast Asia. We are so used to the clean air, the clean water, and the food that we relied on. But as I grew up and as modern life takes over, you see those resources being depleted. So that acts sort of a catalyst for you to do something. In my case, because I'm trained as a biologist and I've been exposed to some of the negotiation, it was kind of natural for me to play a role in that.
If you will collaborate with other ASEAN biodiversity heroes, who would it be among the 10?
I would take all of them. And that is the tip of the iceberg. As you said, our region breeds many more heroes. In fact, everyone can become a biodiversity hero. But to do that, seriously, you have to start with understanding. They have to appreciate and respect that biodiversity plays in our life. That is the beginning.
Is ACB ready to take on the challenge?
Our dream is to make ASEAN a model in biodiversity conservation for the world. And ACB, with the support of all these 10 countries, is very proud of the cooperation. In Korea, during the COP12, the Conference of the Parties on the Convention on Biological Diversity, ASEAN came up with a statement signed by the 10 environment ministers, stating clearly about the need to conserve and protect our biodiversity. That was Korea 2014. In Mexico, the statement was signed by the 10 heads of states. Can you imagine heads of states saying we must be together and conserve our biodiversity? And the world has taken notice. Even the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Secretariat in Montreal is saying, please teach us how you do it in ASEAN. I think as we celebrate the 50th year of ASEAN, we're saying that ASEAN is prosperous. With more reason should we protect our biodiversity, because upon this protection will depend our continued prosperity. Are we ready? We should all be ready. It's not only about ACB, it's about all of us coming together.
Well, that's quite a challenge to the ASEAN community as it celebrates its 50th birthday. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. We've been talking to Roberto Oliva, the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, and two ASEAN biodiversity heroes, Alex Y. Simon from Indonesia and Zachary Abdul Hamid from Malaysia. I'm Walter Tupas. Thank you for watching Rappler Talk.